Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Jammed. I am your host, Jarvis Johnson, and today I have a special guest here with me today, a good friend of mine, known him from way back. He is a graduate of ULM, the Fighting Warhawks. Today he's going to be here talking about coaching and some of the things that's had him jammed up in coaching over the years and what may currently have him jammed, and you guys know how the show goes. Some things are good and some things not so good. Let's start with some of his background. He was a GA after playing football at ULM. He was a GA at ULM. Then he went into his the coaching profession, started out at Midlothian. And I actually met him at Duncanville High School or Duncanville ISD. And then he went on to coach at Irving ISD, went on to Allen, was a state championship coach at Allen, worked at Keller ISD. Then me and him reunited again at Colleyville Heritage. And now we're here again together at Northwest High School. I know that seems like a long list, but this guy, he gets mad when I say this. He is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. I'm here with Aaron Schutz. How you doing, Coach Schutz?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Now, Coach Schutz is going to be upset. He gets upset with me when I say this, that he is the best offensive line coach that I've ever met. And before we get into any of the coaching deals, I'm just going to give you a fun fact about Coach Schutz here. During his time at ULM, he is one of the few college football players to ever beat Nick Saban at home in Tuscaloosa. Can you just tell us a little bit about that time and when that was, when you beat the great Nick Saban at Alabama?
Yeah, beautiful November afternoon. Nobody in the world thought we had a shot at it, which was probably fair at the time. We were a pretty good little football program in the Sun Belt, and the unique thing about that is obviously they paid us a lot of money to come play them. And the year before, Alabama had beat us like 62 to, something short. So we didn't feel really good about it. We knew we were pretty confident in running the ball and some things like that. But obviously you're going to SEC country, going to play Saban, going to Alabama, and you're not feeling really good about your odds. To a point where, I had told, maybe didn't tell out loud, but I had spoke with some of the other players that I was playing with that, we probably didn't feel really good about it. And we knew what we were up facing. And long story short, we come out and, they moved the game up early. Like I said, they wanted to get it done with because they knew they were going to roll us. And, it ended up being one of those deals where things started rolling our way. Things were going our way. And it wasn't easy, but it ended up being one of those games where you just look back on it and you think, man, I probably never touched that top again. That was such a great win for the program, for us. I mean, it was you're standing in front of 90,000 people, 100,000 people, and they're looking at you like, what just happened? And there's that small section of fans where my parents were and some of the other players' parents, and you look at them and, you make eye contact with your mom and dad and all that, and it's such a cool moment. And it's something people still talk about, and that's one of my biggest fears that Saban finally retired is that, you kind of lose that presence in college football that everybody knows Nick Saban's the man. And, and when people hear about ULM, they're like, oh, were you part of that team that beat Alabama? Like, yeah, I was. Starting guard. Felt pretty good about it. So, it's such a cool – when you talk about your own playing experience, it's such a cool time, such a neat experience to go in and do something like that because it's so uncommon.
Yeah, that's awesome, man, and I love that. I love bringing that up to you, and I love when you get out and tell the story to a bunch of coaches, because if you guys don't know, and that may not seem like a big deal to all of you guys, but when you get done listening to this podcast, I want you to go and I want you to pull up Nick Saban's record at home career-wise, and just know that Coach Schutz is one of those L's that he has on his record. All right, so moving on, I know at the beginning I listed off a laundry list of schools that Coach Schutz has been at. I give him a hard time at that, especially when he first started out, all the moving around. He's kind of settled down a little bit more. At first, he was like a free agent. He was gone and moving every 3 years, we would say, right? So, over time and all the places you've been, and I'll let you tell them how long you've been coaching, but what are some areas that you've seen changes in coaching over the years from when you first started to right now?
Yeah, I would definitely say, throughout 17 years, obviously things have changed. Just, the preparation of the game stays pretty simple, right? You line up 11 guys and you go decide what the best situation you can put them in for success. but for the most part, whether it's the players, literally the size of the humans of the players or the speed of the game, the one thing that stays pretty consistent throughout time is the X and O's. You know what you know what you want to hope that your kids know what you know, to try to have the most success possible and try to get the most out of kids. For the most part, when you feel like you start to figure out coaching, right, which, whether we have figured it out or not, when you start to figure out things, you don't like to change a lot. I mean, you see things, you see adjustments, you see things all over social media that gives you great ideas, and then you go back and you decide, how do you adjust within yourself to kind of make that better for your athletes. But transitioning as far as how things have changed over time, I would say, when I came in, which would be early 2010s, right after I was done playing college football, we were already starting to shift to a lot more technology-based, with the huddle and web electronics is actually what I came in on. But, those kind of things probably haven't shifted as much as more of the social media presence, more of, obviously in modern day, you have the transferring of athletes on the collegiate level and probably even in the high school level too, which you see a lot more, a little bit less of students that feel as attached to their high school program because of the 7-on-7 presence, because of things that they have outside of school. You don't get as many students that are just especially in the big schools. Obviously your smaller school kids are still, born and raised in those areas, but as transit as the Metroplex is, you don't have as many students or many athletes that are just diehard for the Northwest Texans,
right?
Where, when we were in high school, we loved our high school, and it was really important for us as athletes growing up that you're playing for your school, you're playing for your team, you're playing for your brothers. And obviously we try to build that. We try to build that within our own kids because we know it's important. But that's a little bit of the things that have changed over time that you see from time to time. And you go, man, these kids don't even know the history of their school, which is unbelievable, right? Because we used to love that stuff, who has a tackle record, right? Who has the most touchdowns in the history, and so it's things like that kids used to grow up on, and obviously I threw out a bunch of different stuff there, but there's a lot of transition more in just the style of athletes we're getting and the type of kids we're getting nowadays.
Yeah. And, it's funny you say that because, you would ask a kid, you can probably go to any high school here in the Metroplex, and you can ask, 50 kids, to sing the school song, and they can't even do that, Whereas, like, when I was in school, and I still know my school song to this day, like, that meant something to us. And we knew it word for word, the fight song and the school song. So that has changed over time with the way kids move around, especially nowadays. You think that the transfer portal in college is bad. We just about kind of got a transfer portal in the high school, at the high school level. Now, you touched on this already, technology. And I know that's changed over time. Like, what are some of the biggest impacts that technology's had? Because I remember when I first started coaching, we would have to drive and meet with the coach to get the VHS. But now with Huddle and stuff like that and social media, like, what is the biggest change you've seen technology-wise when it comes to coaching?
Yeah, I mean, obviously for our staff here, one of the biggest things we have an advantage with is, we work from home on Saturday, and we have our film uploaded by then. Obviously, some coaches are put on a little bit later work on Friday nights because of that. But, that's probably the number one thing is that we have access to our practice film, to our game film, to our kids' highlights, in our hand, And so, I look at that as such a big deal. I could sit in my classroom and watch film. I don't do that, but I could, and on the other side of that is just the social media presence. I mean, I pull up Twitter or X or whatever you call it now, and I can send my kids 5 clips from the games this weekend of offensive linemen doing amazing things on the field, right? And it could be to them in an instant. And it helps support their growth just by seeing the best do it. And, we have access to that at any time. I mean, it's a big deal. The other sides of technology, though, obviously the film is so much better. Clarity, things like that you don't think about until you go back and watch your high school highlights or whatever, and you're like, God, that was awful. It was grainy and all that, and now it's so clear and It's so much easier to scout other teams without having to be there all the time, even though, we do our scouting. But, that's a big deal when it comes to the coaching profession is obviously, for us working at home on Saturdays, giving more time back to us, more time back to our family, and still being able to get our job done. And all that comes back to the technology that's turned in, within the last 10, 15 years. If you're talking more up to date, we got access to the film at halftime this year, which is a lot of trial and error. And it was really good. And then it was an overload at times too. And, you're looking for very specific things, and you're looking for clarity, and you're looking for mistakes, and you're looking for positives. All that information that's got to be flipped and turned around in a matter of 5 minutes to get back in the kids' hands, and what can they handle, and that was always, my biggest question with the new technology coming in is, okay, well, I see it all. Well, okay, I can see it all, but what can they actually handle when I turn around and say, hey, you did this wrong, and it's actually right here on the clip. Let me show you, right? Why'd you do that wrong? Okay, well, let's figure it out. And how much time do you actually have to do that? So there's a lot of obstacles there that, we had to go through this year to just kind of figure out the positives and the negatives and how that system was going to be implemented and worked.
And, technology plays a big role in all of it, especially when you're talking about scouting and preparation as a coach. And it's definitely been a huge help, like you said, being able to work from home. And I think that's a big deal. Technology is so good where coaches can do that from the comfort of their own home and get the stuff out to the kids. As far as social media goes, you could pull up another player from another school because kids post everything. And like you said, you touched on where I can pull up the best of the best doing this drill, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So that helps us all as coaches, right? So let's talk about how the kids are being trained nowadays from when you first started. What are some of the differences you see in the way that players are, lifting and running and doing drills? How has that changed from when you first started to now?
I mean, obviously the biggest one is, these kids are dang near year-round trained for the sport they're associated with, right? Football and whatever, and so when we used to have short set of time. You get them during spring ball, you get them during the fall, and now we're seeing them all summer. They've changed the rules to be able to see them during the off season. They used to not even let you have a ball. It's like, hey, no, you could run routes on air, but you ain't getting a ball in your hand, and so those things, it's such a big deal. It's if you use it correctly, it's such a big deal. Obviously, what comes with that is that you are you're doing what you love all the time, right? You love coaching, you love football, you love the sport you're in, but you always worry about the burnout. You always worry about, are we doing too much? Are we not doing enough? How fast should I progress in this stuff? Because I have so much time allotted, and then you get in the mindset you had all that time allotted and it's gone, And so for me, the biggest change is obviously outside of the more time. Also we got implemented the wet bulb thing this past year where, we're not allowed out in the heat for a certain amount of time. How are kids going to adapt to that? How are we going to adapt to that? How do we change practice around to make sure that we can be outside to get them adjusted to the elements, but they're not allowed to be out there when it gets hot, And so, which, 10, 15 years ago, they would call us soft for that and all that. And I kind of appreciate it now because it is hot and it's getting hotter every year, it feels like. And it's, it's something that our kids have to adjust to, obviously, but it's something coaches have to adjust to as well, especially as we get older. It's not, we're not as tough as we once were. And even though we think we are, we're the elements play a big role in that as you get older too. And so, there's been a lot. I'm sure I'm missing 100 things in the middle, but the biggest one is obviously time that we're allowed to work with our athletes and train our athletes and specialize our athletes. And then obviously the heat restrictions in this past year have been very significant as well.
So I know we have extra time and stuff with our players, but the players that we have today, they have access to so many different things, more than in the past, things that they can find for fun and have more pleasure in. When you and I were growing up, that's what we did for fun. We played sports, we played football, but now they have so much information, so much external pleasures and pressures that they have to abide by and go by. And if football ain't fun, then I can just stop it and go play something else. How do you motivate, and in your coaching style, how do you motivate a player in today's time with all the stuff that they have that they could go and do as opposed to just playing sports?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is you're looking for any way to get them to buy in, and whatever your style of motivation is, obviously you want to show them what they can be, what is offered to them. The reality is when we coach in high school, I mean, half the boys at our school have already figured out that they don't want to play football anymore, or not more. And so, 10 years ago, you might have had 300 kids in a program, and a lot of programs are sitting around 175 now, right? And it's a whole different world. But, it's such a tough question because you think about, well, how do you motivate? How do you get them to want what you loved as a young kid? And like you said, that's all we did. We went outside. We didn't have video games, or if we did, our parents were like, nah, get your butt outside. That's what we did. As a parent now, sticking your kid outside, you're questioned all the time. And so it's difficult, but what you hope is that when you get these kids to show up, one, you don't beat them down so much mentally, physically, whatever it is that keeps them from not returning. You kind of got to meet them where they're at, which is not a coach's style of the past, right? Back in when we first started, every kid's the same. You treat them all the same, and we still do in a lot of aspects. But there's a lot more. I think the word is probably compassion for the kids. You want them to want to be a part of your program. You want them to play for you. You want to show them the benefits of being a part of sports, just in general. I mean, that's a huge deal for our health of our student body, right? Just getting out and being active, but being a part of a program and what that teaches you throughout life is such a big deal.
So the generations have changed over time, and some may say that the mental state of kids nowadays is different from way back when. How do you combat and deal with the mental health in sports? Whereas, back when we played, the coach could yell at you and you didn't take it. You just took it as coaching, where now kids may be, I don't know what the right word is, a little bit more sensitive, or they have a little bit more feelings, and you got to be careful kind of what you say. How do you attack the mental health of a player in this generation?
For me personally, and this is something that it's tough because coaching offensive line is about discipline, about accountability, right? Doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do, and when the coach builds the trust and he puts you in the field and you're going to do what you're supposed to do, right? And without that, there's consequences, right? It hurts somebody else, especially in such an unselfish position. But one of the things I try to do every year is get out ahead of it, obviously explain to the kids, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what you agreed to sign up for. And we have different ways of motivating you. We have different ways of holding you accountable. One of the things with the offensive lineman, I talk about truth and honesty, right? I speak in truth and honesty. But I always try to find a way to have a little bit of fun, try to find a little bit of way to, even in our darkest times, right? Even in our worst practices, even in the biggest gripe out meeting, at the very end, I try to find a positive. And then, the reality is you worry as a coach that did I do too much, right? Was I too aggressive in the way I spoke to them? Did I punish them? Too much consequences, right? Or whatever it is. And so then you're constantly going back, and that plays a toll on me all the time. I go and find that young man and say, everything good? Are we good? Do you understand where I'm coming from? I want to see the best out of you, right? And try to make sure they understand that it's not just coming from an angry guy, right? It's not just coming from a bad spot. It's coming from a spot that I want to see the best out of you, right? And because of that, sometimes the words are mixed. Sometimes it's not said and delivered exactly how you wanted it to be delivered, but hopefully the idea of what was behind it sticks with you, right? And honestly, I will say this, and I do take pride in having a great relationship with my players and making sure that, not that they love me, but I hope they do. Not that they like me, but I hope they do. But that they understand that, when it's all said and done, I care about them. I want them to have success. I mean, it's not really about us coaches anymore. It's really about them having success. And that's some coach talk in there, but that's some reality in there too. So, the mental side of things, I mean, you can see it on their face when they walk in the door, what kind of day they're having, right? And you can adjust yourself at any time. Hey, that young man's having a rough day. Okay, how do I pick him up? How do I – and, you know, if you're a bottom line guy, here's the reality is if you're a bottom line, like you showed up, you signed up for this, like I said, I have that in me, but you still have to find a way to get the best out of them. Right, and sometimes it's smiling and patting them on the back, and sometimes it's raising your voice and showing intensity. But usually they understand when they've seen both sides of it, and they've seen the positives, and they've seen the pats on the backs, and they've seen the appreciation. They can understand where that other side's coming from too.
Now, we all know that the coaching profession, that it's very demanding. And, as a young coach, when you really don't have a family and you don't have kids, you can do a little bit more, and the time isn't so precious, I guess. You can kind of put more of your efforts into coaching. But how has your perspective of balancing, coaching and the home life, how has it evolved over time? Because when you started, you were single, no kids, and obviously, over a decade or so later, you're married. You got kids. How has your perspective changed as far as that goes with the family now and coaching?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that coaches probably have the hardest time with. Obviously, when we're at home, we love our kids to death, and we love our wife to death, and we love whoever it is, and you want to spend as much time as you can with them. And but you always know you have a job. Your job is very important too, and so it's a tough balance. When you're young, you don't have kids. You might have I'm just going off on a tangent here, but your wife. You're always going to date your wife, and you're going to love your wife, and that's what keeps the relationship going. But life doesn't change until you have kids. I mean, that's the reality, and so. Up until I was 30 years old, the kids weren't a part of it. It was, me and my wife. And so you still have a lot of time to dive into the kids and do your job because that's understanding, But when the kids come into play and you got to go home at the end of the day after work for 12, 14 hours and go, well, all right, guys, what are we doing? What do we want for dinner? The real reality of the world, okay, it's bath time, man. Bath time's a pain in the butt. It's 30 minutes. And so, I mean, you talk about bedtime, 30 minutes, depending on your kid, could be longer. And so, you think as a teacher and a coach, like your job is basically to serve other people. I mean, that's all you're doing. And then you flip around and now you're serving at my house 2 little babies and my wife, and it's like, it's nonstop. And it's very tiring, it's very demanding. And then how many times you have to look at yourself in the mirror just like you did when you were a young athlete and ask yourself, are you doing enough, right? Am I doing everything I can? And it's tough because the answer is no sometimes. And then you got to really look at the reality of, man, all right, let's strap them shoes a little tighter and let's get after it, man. And that's, man, I just think it's the biggest challenge for men, for boys turning to men to a true adulthood, where, you have other people that rely on you outside of your job. And when we got into this profession, really a lot of us, all we had was these kids that we were pouring into all the time. Right. And so it's just a tough balance there that I'm not perfect at. So I'm working on it. I tell my wife I'm working on it all the time.
Yeah, you and me both. Yeah. Now, as how has your family influenced the way that you relate to your player, your coaching style? I know, like you said, times change, but how have they influenced the way you interact now with your players since now you do have kids?
I think that's the next, it's the craziest thing your brain will do is I am more patient. I listen a lot better because I look at my son who's 7, right? And how many similarities a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old have is crazy. And just the understanding of a little bit more understanding where things are coming from. And you, as a parent, one of the biggest things you start to realize is, man, these kids don't have a lot of control. A kid's late to practice. Well, my mom didn't bring me. Yeah, his mom was that's his ride, and we don't control that. And obviously he doesn't either, and he could try, but there's a lot of things like that that you start to notice as a parent yourself, even of just young kids that, they're a little bit more compassion because of it, just because you have a little bit better understanding of it. When you don't have kids, you don't know. I mean, you're so in the dark. You think you got a clue, you ain't got a clue. It's a different world, and that's not to minimize people without kids. I'm just saying it's a different world, and you learn daily from them, right? And they ain't all the same, and just like your players, they ain't all the same either, right? And there's different in all of them.
As we get ready to wrap up the episode here, let's finish it up. Let's talk about the future here. So, give me a sentence or two on where you see coaching heading in the future. Like, what do you see coaching will look like technique-wise, blah, 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 in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, I think the biggest adjustment, like I said, is obviously let me just say this. It's hard to predict anything anymore, right? We've had a lot change over the years, and, the biggest fear is obviously less kids being interested in the sport, and that's the fear that I think a lot of coaches are facing, especially young coaches getting in is, and obviously they don't know the difference, but for us that have been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years or more, you start to notice things like that, like I said, we had a big change this year in the heat rule, which, doesn't sound like a big deal to people that are not a part of it, but that's a little bit of a transition to more of the culture of modern day and more of the safety of the sport. And, another really one you notice nowadays, guardian caps in the NFL and things like that. That's like, hey, man, we really are focused on trying to keep this thing safe, to keep this thing rolling. But as far as the future of coaching, it's obviously probably another thing that's worth noting is the style of young coaches that come in. Obviously, they're going to relate more to the players, and I think that's something you see as you transition as an older coach is that, you're not as in tune with the youth as you once were, and most of the young guys we see nowadays are a little bit, we'd probably consider more hype guys and with the substance, right? They're good coaches. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a little bit of a different role, a little bit of different trajectory with those guys. But future of coaching, man, I don't know. It could, who knows? That's a tough one.
Fair enough. Yeah, you never can predict the future, so we'll see going forward. If me and you are still in it 10 to 20 years from now, we'll come back and we'll recap what happened over that time. All right, couple more things here to jam you up a little bit. One sentence. Give me the reward of coaching in today's time. One sentence.
Man, there's nothing better in the world than seeing your kids, not just graduate, but have successes. And I know you said one sentence, but I think that's another different thing about the transition of time as a coach is that at one point you are a little bit selfish. You like the reward, and then you start noticing that, our kids' successes, our athletes' successes, whether it's on the field or in life, is a pretty cool deal because you had an impact on that.
All right, and the next one is on the flip side, give me some of the big, one sentence again, the biggest challenges of being a coach today.
Yeah, and it touches back on the family life balance and the time, you put into this thing is, waking up early and staying up late, and that's always going to be the tough one. And so, I'll cut it there.
Yeah, okay. All right, and then just to finish it up here, Coach Schutz, man, what kind of legacy do you hope to leave as a coach, both in terms of the game? Remember, I gave you your props as being one of the best offensive line coaches that I've ever known, and the impact that you have on your players. What is the one thing that you want them to say about your legacy as a coach?
Man, I really hope when it's all said and done, those kids just look back and be like, oh, Coach Schutz held me accountable. He made me a better man. And hopefully they come back and reach back out and show appreciation, so I can show appreciation to them as well. So it's just that's another one when you don't think about yourself a lot, you don't think about a lot, but it is a big deal to think about when you talk about coaches and leaving a legacy and impact with their players.
All right, and then a lot of young coaches are getting into the game. Me and you've seen it here recently. We got players that we've coached and they've graduated college and they're coming back. If you had a piece of advice to give an aspiring coach today, you know, those that are trying to find a way to make it and start a family and do all that, what is one piece of advice that you would give aspiring coaches?
What's wrong with you? No, you know, the biggest thing is, man, dive in head first, you know, and learn as much as you can and realize you don't know as much as you think you know. And for me, it's such a big deal that youthful coaches are still coming in and doing this thing. And, you know, it's a big deal for our profession. And so I would say, you know, obviously, you know, dive in, man. Just buy into it, and whatever you guys are about, whatever you were good at, man, instill that in your guys, and find a way to have a little bit of balance in your life, you know, obviously. But, you know, while you can, you buy in and you do the best you can and try to get yourself to a spot that you're really happy at.
Well, coaches, aspiring coaches, there you have it. Man, Coach Schutz, I appreciate you coming out. If you guys didn't take anything else from what Coach Schutz today, try to take at least one thing from him. Coach, I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Yes, sir.
And take whatever he said and take it to heart. If not, you may be jammed. Thanks for listening.